The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm at Bellini's, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where reservations were made weeks in advance, and the soft lighting made everyone look their best. The baby grand piano in the corner was normally played by a rotating cast of music students from the local university, filling the space with gentle melodies that complemented the clinking of silverware and murmur of conversation. Tonight, though, the piano sat silent. The scheduled pianist had called in sick, and restaurant owner Tony was actually a bit relieved. The ambient noise of satisfied customers was its own kind of music, and the evening was going smoothly without the added expense. It was just past 7 when Tony noticed him through the front windows. A man stood outside, peering in, clearly not dressed for an evening at Bellini's. His clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, a faded jacket several sizes too large, pants held up by what appeared to be rope rather than a belt, and shoes that had long ago lost their shape. His beard was untrimmed, his hair wild and pushed under a knit cap despite the mild autumn weather. Tony sighed. He'd had to shoo away people asking for handouts before. It was bad for business, made customers uncomfortable. He caught the eye of Pete, his host for the evening, and nodded toward the door. Pete understood immediately and headed to intercept the stranger before he could enter. But something unexpected happened. The man didn't immediately ask for money. Instead, he spoke quietly to Pete, gesturing toward the piano in the corner. Pete's eyebrows rose in obvious surprise, and after a moment's hesitation, he led the disheveled visitor over to Tony. "Boss," Pete said, keeping his voice low. "This gentleman has an unusual request." Tony crossed his arms, already preparing his standard refusal speech. The restaurant industry had made him both compassionate and cautious in equal measure over 20 years. "I'd like to play," the stranger said, his voice surprisingly gentle and clear. He nodded toward the piano. "In exchange for a meal." Tony couldn't help the laugh that escaped him. It wasn't meant to be cruel, more a reaction of pure surprise. The baby grand was a $30,000 instrument. His regular pianists were conservatory trained. "Look, buddy," Tony said, "that's not how this works. We hire professional musicians." The man didn't flinch at the rejection. There was a quiet dignity in the way he stood there, hands clasped in front of him. Up close, Tony could see that despite the shabby clothes, the man's hands were clean, his nails trimmed. "I understand," the stranger said, "but I haven't eaten since yesterday morning and I used to play. Quite well, actually." There was no desperation in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. A few nearby diners had noticed the exchange. Tony could feel their attention, their curiosity, and perhaps a touch of discomfort. He needed to resolve this quickly. "I can't let you play for the customers," Tony said, lowering his voice. He reached for his wallet. "But here's $20. There's a sandwich shop down the block." The man looked at the offered money but didn't take it. "I don't want charity," he said softly. "I want to earn my meal, one song. If you don't like it, I'll leave immediately." Tony hesitated. There was something in the man's eyes, a clarity, a certainty that made him pause. The restaurant was full of well-heeled customers enjoying their $35 pasta dishes and $12 glasses of wine. What would they think of this clearly homeless man at the piano? Lisa, Tony's most experienced waitress, approached with a concerned look. "Everything okay over here?" she asked, but her eyes said, "Do you need help getting rid of this guy?" The man turned to her with a small, dignified nod. "I was just asking if I could play the piano in exchange for a meal." Lisa looked at Tony, eyebrows raised in a silent question. Tony was about to refuse again when he noticed the man's hands. Despite everything else about his appearance, those hands were different. The long fingers, the way they moved slightly at his sides as if already playing invisible keys. It was a tell Tony recognized from years of watching musicians. "What would you play?" Tony asked, surprising himself with the question. The man's face brightened slightly. "What would you like to hear? Classical, jazz? Something more contemporary?" That response caught Tony off guard, not the limited repertoire he'd expected. "You choose," Tony said, making a split-second decision he wasn't entirely sure of. The stranger nodded. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." Tony led him to the piano, aware of the eyes following them. The glossy black baby grand seemed to highlight the man's disheveled appearance in stark contrast. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances and whispered to each other. At another table, a businessman in an expensive suit frowned openly. "One song," Tony said firmly, then stepped back, already second-guessing himself. The man settled onto the bench, taking a moment to adjust its height. The simple action was done with such familiarity that Tony felt a flicker of hope. The stranger took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and then placed his hands on the keys. The first notes were tentative, almost a question. Then, as if responding to his own inquiry, the man's fingers began to move with increasing confidence. The melody was unfamiliar to Tony at first, something classical but not immediately recognizable. Within seconds, however, the music bloomed into something extraordinary. The pianist's transformation was immediate and complete. His hunched shoulders straightened. His weathered face softened. Most remarkably, his hands seemed to float above the keys, alternating between powerful chords and delicate runs that required astonishing dexterity. Tony stood transfixed. This wasn't just competent playing, this was mastery. The piece swelled with emotion, drawing the listener through passages of melancholy beauty and moments of triumphant resolution. The man's entire body became part of the performance, swaying slightly, his expression shifting with the music's changing moods. Around the restaurant, conversations had stopped. A waiter stood with a bottle of wine half poured, momentarily forgotten. Even the kitchen staff had paused, peering through the service window at the unexpected performance. Tony glanced around at his customers. The businessman who had frowned earlier now leaned forward in his chair, wine glass suspended halfway to his lips. An elderly couple who had been dining in comfortable silence now held hands across the table, their eyes closed as they listened. A group of young professionals who had been loudly celebrating a colleague's promotion fell silent, their animated conversation giving way to wonder. The music filled every corner of the restaurant, somehow both powerful and intimate. Tony had hired many talented pianists over the years, but none had commanded the room like this. The piece reached a crescendo, the man's fingers flying across the keys with impossible speed and precision, before resolving into a gentle, questioning conclusion that echoed the opening notes. When the final chord faded, the restaurant remained silent for one suspended moment. Then someone began to applaud. Others joined in quickly, and suddenly the entire restaurant was filled with enthusiastic applause. A few people even stood. The man at the piano opened his eyes, looking almost surprised to find himself in a restaurant surrounded by strangers. He gave a small, humble nod of acknowledgement, then turned to look at Tony with a question in his eyes. Tony was already moving toward him, his earlier skepticism completely forgotten. He struggled to find the right words. That was extraordinary. What's your name? Ben, the man said simply. Well, Ben, Tony said, extending his hand, I think you've more than earned your dinner. In fact, if you'd be willing to play a few more pieces, your meal is on the house. Ben's face lit up with a smile that transformed him further, revealing a glimpse of who he might have been before whatever circumstances had led him to this moment. I would be honored, he said, taking Tony's hand in a firm handshake. As Tony led Ben to a table, instructing Lisa to bring him whatever he wanted from the menu, the other diners watched with newfound respect. The same people who might have walked past Ben on the street without a second glance now saw him differently. They whispered to each other, wondering about his story, how someone with such obvious talent could end up in such circumstances. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that would change not only Ben's life but the lives of many others in the community. As Ben settled at his table, looking slightly overwhelmed by the menu Lisa presented to him, Tony pulled up a chair across from him. So, Tony said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, where did you learn to play like that? Ben's eyes, which had seemed dull and weary when he first entered the restaurant, now held a spark of something long dormant, hope perhaps, or simply the satisfaction of being seen for his talent rather than his circumstances. It's a long story, Ben replied, his voice stronger now, one I haven't told anyone in quite some time. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm of conversation and dining, but something fundamental had shifted. The barriers that normally separated people of different circumstances had momentarily dissolved through the universal language of music. And in that moment, a journey began that none of them could have anticipated when the strange, disheveled man had first appeared at the door, asking a simple question, "Can I play for food?" Ben sat across from Tony at a quiet corner table, his hands wrapped around a mug of hot soup as if drawing warmth from it. The restaurant had returned to its usual hum of conversation, but every few minutes someone would glance their way with undisguised curiosity. The homeless man who had played like a concert pianist was not something you saw every day, even in a city known for its surprises. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Tony asked, watching as Ben carefully broke a piece of bread and dipped it into the soup. Ben chewed thoughtfully before answering.
"A proper meal like this?"
"Months, maybe. The shelters do their best, but—" He shrugged, leaving the rest unsaid. Tony nodded, trying not to stare as Ben ate with slow, deliberate bites, the careful pace of someone who had learned that food couldn't be taken for granted. Despite his worn clothing and weathered appearance, there was something refined about the way he held his spoon, the way he dabbed at his mouth with the napkin after each sip. "That piece you played," Tony said. "Chopin, right?" Ben looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You know classical music?" "My mother insisted on piano lessons when I was a kid. I never got very far, but I remember some things." Tony smiled. "Nocturne in E-flat major, though I never played it like that." "Not even close." A small smile tugged at the corner of Ben's mouth. "It was always one of my favorites." Before Tony could ask more, Lisa approached with the main course, a plate of steaming pasta with seafood that was one of the restaurant's specialties. She set it down with a warm smile. "The chef added extra shrimp," she said to Ben. "He said anyone who plays like that deserves the best we've got." Ben looked up at her with genuine gratitude. "Please thank him for me." As Lisa walked away, Tony noticed a couple at a nearby table signaling to him. He excused himself and went over. The woman leaned in and spoke quietly. "We'd like to pay for his meal," she said, nodding toward Ben. "And maybe, do you think he would play another piece before we go?" By the time Tony returned to the table, similar requests had come from 3 other tables. Ben was halfway through his pasta, eating with the same careful appreciation. "You've made quite an impression," Tony said, sitting back down. "Several customers want to buy your dinner, and they're asking if you'd play again." Ben's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "I don't want to impose. I said 1 song for 1 meal. You've already been more than generous." "It's not an imposition if people are asking for it," Tony replied. "Look, I'll be honest with you. Tuesday nights aren't usually this busy. Having you play, it's good for business." He leaned forward. "How about this? Play a few more pieces tonight, dinner's on the house, and maybe we can talk about something more regular." The look of disbelief on Ben's face made Tony realize how long it had probably been since anyone had offered this man an opportunity. "You don't even know me," Ben said quietly. "I know you can play that piano better than anyone I've ever hired," Tony answered. "The rest we can figure out." After finishing his meal, Ben made his way back to the piano. The restaurant had grown even busier, with people at the bar turning their stools to face the corner where the baby grand stood. Word had somehow spread to the street, and walk-ins were being told there was a 30-minute wait for a table. Unusual for a Tuesday. This time there was no hesitation when Ben sat at the piano. He adjusted the bench, straightened his back, and let his fingers hover over the keys for just a moment before beginning to play. The first piece was something more modern, a beautiful arrangement of a popular song that everyone seemed to recognize. The simple melody was transformed in Ben's hands, becoming deeper, richer, filled with unexpected harmonies that made it both familiar and new. As the evening progressed, Ben played everything from classical pieces to jazz standards to contemporary hits. Each was performed with the same technical brilliance and emotional depth. Between songs, he would pause, acknowledge the applause with a small nod, and then lose himself in the next piece. In the kitchen, the chef and his staff worked to the rhythm of the music drifting through the service window. The bartender found himself mixing drinks in time to a ragtime piece that had the whole bar smiling. Servers moved between tables with an extra spring in their step. Tony watched it all from near the entrance, where he greeted customers and managed the unexpected rush. A food critic who happened to be dining that evening stopped on her way out. "You never mentioned you had a house pianist of this caliber," she said. "I'm definitely including it in my review." "He's new," Tony replied with a smile. "But I think he'll be staying on." Near midnight, as the last customers were finishing their desserts, Ben played a final piece, something gentle and reflective that seemed to capture the mood of the late hour. When he finished, the remaining diners gave him a standing ovation. Ben stood and gave a small bow, looking simultaneously exhausted and more alive than when he had first walked in. After the last customers had left and the staff was cleaning up, Tony invited Ben back to his office, a small room off the kitchen that was more storage closet than proper workspace. He cleared a stack of invoices from a chair so Ben could sit. That was something else, Tony said, shaking his head in amazement. Where did you learn to play like that? Ben was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. Juilliard, he finally said. I was a student there a long time ago. Tony's eyebrows shot up. Juilliard? That's the top music school in the country. Yes. Ben agreed simply. And now you're... Tony caught himself before finishing the thought. Homeless? Ben supplied the word without bitterness. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Tony wanted to ask more but wasn't sure if he should. Ben saved him by continuing. I had a promising start. Recitals, competitions, a few concert tours, then some personal issues. Health problems. By the time I got back on my feet, my career momentum was gone. Teaching jobs dried up during budget cuts. One thing led to another. He spread his hands in a gesture that encompassed his current circumstances. When was the last time you played regularly? Tony asked. On a proper piano? Years. Ben's gaze drifted to his hands. I practice when I can. Library keyboards with headphones. Sometimes department stores. Once in a while a church will let me use their piano during off hours. Tony tried to imagine it. This extraordinarily gifted musician reduced to stealing moments on display pianos, keeping his talent alive in waiting rooms and empty churches. Well, Tony said decisively, you can practice here now, and perform if you're willing. I can't pay much to start, maybe not even close to what you're worth, but there's dinner every night you play, and we can work something out about... He trailed off, realizing he was about to bring up Ben's living situation. Ben seemed to understand. Thank you, he said quietly, but I should be clear about something. I've had struggles. With alcohol years ago, with depression more recently. I'm not using now and I'm working on the rest, but I believe in being honest up front. Tony nodded, appreciating the candor. Fair enough. We all have our battles. Some more visible than others, Ben replied with a small, sad smile. As they worked out the details of when Ben would play and what Tony could offer, Lisa knocked on the office door. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but I thought you'd want to see this. She held out her phone. On the screen was a social media post, a video of Ben playing earlier that evening. The caption read, Homeless man asks to play piano for food. What happens next will give you chills. Posted 40 minutes ago, Lisa said. It already has over 1,000 shares. Ben looked alarmed. People were filming me? Welcome to 2025, Tony said with a shrug. Everything ends up online these days. Ben didn't look comforted by this explanation. Hey, Tony said gently, this could be a good thing. Maybe it helps you get back on your feet, you know? Ben nodded, but his expression remained troubled. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention. Lisa's phone chimed with a notification. She glanced at it and her eyes widened. Channel 7 just commented on the video. They want to know where this happened and if they can send a reporter tomorrow. The color drained from Ben's face. I should go, he said, standing abruptly. Thank you for the meal and the opportunity, but... Wait, Tony said, raising a hand. Let's think this through. You don't have to talk to any reporters if you don't want to, but don't walk away from a chance to play again. That's your gift, Ben. The world deserves to hear it, and you deserve to be heard. Ben hesitated, caught between the door and the possibility of reclaiming something he had lost. One day at a time, Tony added. Just come back tomorrow and play. That's all. We'll figure out the rest as we go. After a long moment, Ben nodded. Tomorrow, he agreed quietly. I'll be here. As Tony watched him leave, he wondered about the story behind this remarkable man, what had led someone with such extraordinary talent to the streets, and whether the piano in the corner of his restaurant might somehow help lead him back. Morning light filtered through the windows of Bellini's as Tony unlocked the front door. He was surprised to find Ben already waiting outside, sitting on a nearby bench with his few possessions in a weathered backpack beside him. Despite having slept who knows where, Ben had clearly made an effort to clean up. His beard was trimmed, his hair combed back, and though his clothes were still worn, they looked neater than the day before. You're early. Tony said, holding the door open. Ben stood, shouldering his backpack. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome back after running off last night. We had a deal, Tony replied simply. Come on in. Coffee's just getting started. Inside, the restaurant was quiet and empty, chairs still upturned on tables from the night before. The morning prep crew wouldn't arrive for another hour. Tony led Ben to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine that had just finished brewing. Sugar? Milk? He asked. Black is fine, Ben said. He remained standing as if unsure whether he should sit. Tony gestured to a stool by the prep counter. Take a load off. We need to talk about today. Ben sat cradling the mug in his hands. About that reporter. Already called this morning, Tony confirmed. And 3 others. That video has over 100,000 views now. Ben stared down at his coffee. I'm not comfortable being on camera. I figured as much, Tony said. I told them all the same thing. The pianist prefers his privacy, but they're welcome to come hear you play. No interviews, no cameras during the performance. Relief washed over Ben's face. Thank you, Tony shrugged. Your choice. But here's the thing, we're going to be packed tonight. That video did more for this place than a year's worth of advertising. I'm glad I could help, Ben said earnestly. I want to help too, Tony replied. He hesitated, then continued. Look, there's a small storage room upstairs. It's not much, basically a glorified closet, but there's space for a cot. If you need a place to stay, Ben's eyes widened slightly. You'd let me stay here? You hardly know me. I know enough, Tony said, and it makes sense. You're going to be playing late. The shelters have curfews, and frankly, I'd sleep better knowing my new pianist isn't out on the streets. For a moment, Ben looked like he might refuse out of pride. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly. I don't know what to say. Say you'll play tonight, Tony replied. And maybe tell me a bit more about how Benjamin Wilson from Juilliard ended up asking to play for food. Ben's head snapped up. How did you— The internet, Tony said with a small smile. Once that video went viral, people started connecting dots. Took me about 5 minutes to find articles about your early career. Ben was quiet for a long moment. Those feel like stories about someone else now. I'd like to hear your version, Tony said gently. If you're willing to share it. The kitchen door swung open as the head chef Miguel arrived for his shift. He stopped short when he saw Ben. The piano man, Miguel exclaimed with a wide grin. My friend, that seafood pasta was nothing. Tonight I make you my grandmother's special recipe, the one we don't even put on the menu. Ben smiled, a genuine smile that softened the weathered lines of his face. I'd be honored. After Miguel moved further into the kitchen to begin his prep work, Tony gestured toward the dining room. Let's go sit somewhere more comfortable. They settled at a corner table, the same one where Ben had eaten the night before. Outside, the city was coming to life, early commuters hurrying past, delivery trucks double-parked, a street sweeper making its slow progress along the curb. I was born in a small town, Ben began, his voice quiet but steady. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families there. One of them had a piano. The wife noticed me watching when their children took lessons, so she let me try when no one else was using it. I was 7. Tony listened without interrupting as Ben continued. By the time I was 10, I was better than their children. The piano teacher convinced my mother I needed proper training. She took on extra work to pay for lessons. When I was 17, I auditioned for Juilliard on a borrowed piano. Somehow I got in with a partial scholarship. Ben paused, taking a sip of his coffee. His eyes had taken on a distant look, seeing into the past. The next years were intense, working part-time jobs between classes and practice, living on ramen noodles and coffee. But I was happy. Music was everything. His expression darkened slightly. Then I met Lily. She was a violinist, brilliant, beautiful, passionate about music in the same way I was. We got married right after graduation. Tony noticed Ben's left hand unconsciously touch his right, where a wedding band might once have been. We were building careers, playing concerts, teaching. Things were good. Ben's voice grew softer. Then she got sick, cancer. It moved fast. Within 8 months, she was gone. I'm sorry, Tony said quietly. Ben nodded, acknowledging the sympathy. After that, I fell apart. Started drinking, missed performances, lost teaching positions. The classical music world is small. Word gets around. Eventually, no one would hire me. But your talent, Tony began. Talent isn't enough, Ben interrupted gently. Reliability matters. Professionalism matters. I broke trust with a lot of people. He took another sip of coffee. I sold our piano to pay medical bills. Sold almost everything else to keep our apartment. When that ran out, I crashed with friends until they got tired of my drinking. By then I was... He gestured vaguely at himself. This. How long? Tony asked. 3 years on the streets, Ben replied. Got sober about 18 months ago. A church outreach program helped with that. But getting back up is harder than falling down. Tony leaned forward. And yesterday? What made you walk in here and ask to play? A small sad smile crossed Ben's face. Hunger, mostly. I'd tried the usual spots for day labor, but nothing came through. I saw the piano through the window and, I don't know. Something just said to try. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Ben's story hanging between them. Outside, a city bus rumbled past, momentarily drowning out the sounds of Miguel's food preparation in the kitchen. Well, Tony finally said, I'm glad you did. Throughout the day, the restaurant staff arrived one by one. Each reacted differently to Ben's presence. The younger servers, who had seen the viral video, treated him with a kind of starstruck awe. The older staff were more reserved but respectful. Tony introduced him simply as our new pianist, offering no explanation about his circumstances. By late afternoon, Ben had settled into the small room upstairs with his few belongings. Tony had found him a change of clothes. Nothing fancy, just a clean button-down shirt and slacks that a server had left behind months ago. They were a bit too big, but with the sleeves rolled up and a belt to hold the pants, Ben looked presentable. At 5 o'clock, an hour before opening, Ben sat at the piano, running through scales and exercises to warm up. His fingers moved with increasing confidence as he reacquainted himself with the instrument. After 15 minutes of technical work, he began playing, softly at first, then with growing intensity. The music filled the empty restaurant, drawing staff members from their prep work to listen. Tony watched from near the bar, amazed by the transformation. When Ben played, the years of hardship seemed to fall away. His posture straightened, his expression became focused and peaceful, and his hands, those remarkable hands, moved with a grace and precision that seemed almost supernatural. Lisa paused beside Tony, a stack of menus in her arms. It's like watching someone come back to life, she whispered. Tony nodded. I think that's exactly what's happening. By 6, there was already a line outside the door, something Bellini's had never seen before on a Wednesday night. The local news vans were parked across the street, reporters doing stand-ups with the restaurant in the background. Social media had done its work. Everyone wanted to see the homeless piano virtuoso. Tony approached Ben, who had taken a break and was sitting quietly at the corner table. Nervous? Tony asked. Ben looked toward the windows where faces were already peering in. Terrified, he admitted. It's been years since I played for a real audience, an audience that's actually coming to hear me. You'll be great, Tony assured him, just like last night. Ben shook his head slightly. Last night no one knew who I was or what they were about to hear. Tonight they're expecting something amazing. What if I disappoint them? Tony put a hand on Ben's shoulder. From what I've seen, the only person you've been disappointing is yourself. Time to stop, don't you think? Before Ben could respond, the front door opened and the first customers began to enter. The evening had begun. What followed was unlike anything Bellini's had ever experienced. Every table was filled within 20 minutes. The bar area was standing room only. People ordered quickly, their attention clearly focused on the piano in the corner rather than the menu. At precisely 7 o'clock, Ben walked to the piano. The restaurant fell silent as he took his seat, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. For a breathless moment, he sat completely still, eyes closed. Then, with a deep breath, he began to play. The piece was Bach, complex, mathematical, precise. Ben's fingers flew over the keys with flawless technique, building the intricate patterns of sound that had challenged pianists for centuries. When he finished, the applause was immediate and thunderous. As the evening progressed, Ben played piece after piece, each demonstrating a different facet of his extraordinary ability. Between sets, he would rest briefly at his corner table, where Miguel personally served him the promised special dish, a rich, aromatic stew that had been simmering all day. Outside, the line of people waiting for tables never diminished. Inside, Diners lingered over dessert and coffee, reluctant to give up their seats while the music continued. By the time Ben played his final piece just after midnight, he had performed for nearly 5 hours with only short breaks. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Later, after the yaoi, last customers had left and the staff was cleaning up, Ben sat at the bar, looking exhausted but somehow more alive than he had that morning. "You did it," Tony said, sliding a glass of water toward him. Ben nodded, too tired for words. "And," Tony added with a small smile, "there's someone here who wants to meet you." He gestured toward the entrance, where an elderly man in an impeccably tailored suit stood waiting. "This is Dr. Howard Chen. He teaches at the City Conservatory." Dr. Chen stepped forward, extending his hand to Ben. "Mr. Wilson," he said warmly, "I've been following your career since your debut with the Philharmonic 15 years ago. I never thought I'd have the chance to hear you play again." Ben stood, accepting the handshake with surprise. "You know my work?" "Of course," Dr. Chen replied. "Your interpretation of Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto was one of the finest I've ever heard." "And tonight," he shook his head in admiration. "Tonight proved that you haven't lost any of your extraordinary gift." Ben seemed at a loss for words. "I'll be direct, Mr. Wilson," Dr. Chen continued. "The conservatory has an opening for a piano instructor. After what I heard tonight, I'd like to offer you the position." The world seemed to stop for a moment as Ben processed what he was hearing. "A teaching position?" he finally managed to say. "But my situation, my history." Dr. Chen smiled gently. "Music is about redemption, Mr. Wilson, about second chances. I think you're long overdue for yours." As Tony watched, he saw something change in Ben's eyes, a spark of hope that had been missing that morning. The journey ahead would not be easy, but the first step had been taken. All because a hungry man had gathered his courage and asked, "Can I play for food?" The morning sun cast long shadows through the city streets as Ben walked alongside Dr. Chen toward the conservatory. 1 week had passed since that life-changing night at Bellini's, and each day had brought new developments that left Ben feeling as if he were living in a dream. "Nervous?" Dr. Chen asked, glancing at Ben as they approached the imposing stone building. "Terrified," Ben admitted with a small smile. It had become his standard answer to that question lately. He looked down at himself, still getting used to the sight of clean, new clothes. The dark blue blazer and gray slacks had been purchased 2 days earlier, his first new clothing in years. Tony had insisted on advancing him part of his earnings from playing at the restaurant to look the part for his conservatory interview. "Don't be," Dr. Chen said reassuringly. "The board has already reviewed your performance videos. This is mostly a formality, those videos." Ben still couldn't quite believe how quickly his story had spread. The original clip of him playing at Bellini's had led to more recordings from subsequent nights, each one shared thousands of times. Local news had covered the story first, then national outlets picked it up. "Homeless virtuoso finds second chance through music" had become a headline across the country. At the entrance to the conservatory, Dr. Chen paused. "Before we go in, there's something you should know. A few of the faculty remember you from your earlier career. Some of them, well, they have concerns about your reliability." Ben nodded, unsurprised. "They have every right to be cautious." "Just be honest about what happened and what's changed," Dr. Chen advised. "Your talent speaks for itself. Now you need to show them the man behind the music." Inside, the familiar smell of wood polish and paper brought a rush of memories. How many hours had he spent in buildings like this, practicing until his fingers ached? It felt like returning to a homeland he had long ago abandoned. The interview lasted 2 hours. The 5-person committee asked probing questions about Ben's background, his fall from grace, and his time on the streets. He answered truthfully, neither minimizing his mistakes nor making excuses for them. "Addiction is a disease," he explained when asked about his drinking, "but the choices I made while in its grip were still my choices. I take full responsibility for them." When asked to demonstrate his teaching approach, Ben worked with a student who had been brought in, a talented teenager struggling with a particularly challenging passage of Liszt. The way Ben broke down the technical problems, offering practical solutions while maintaining the emotional core of the music, visibly impressed the committee. "You haven't taught in quite some time," one committee member observed. "Yet your approach seems very current." Ben smiled slightly. "Music doesn't change. and neither do the challenges of learning it. What matters is connecting with the student's individual needs. By the time he left the building, Ben felt drained but hopeful. Dr. Chen, who had observed but not participated in the interview, walked him out. "You did well," he said. "We'll have an answer for you by tomorrow." Ben thanked him and began the walk back to Bellini's, where he was scheduled to play that evening. The restaurant had become his temporary home, the small room above the kitchen a sanctuary after years of uncertainty. Tony had been true to his word, providing not just a place to stay but also regular meals and a nightly audience. As Ben walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket, another new development in his rapidly changing life. A local business owner, moved by his story, had provided a prepaid phone for job hunting purposes. It had quickly become filled with contacts, reporters seeking interviews, music lovers offering support, and even a few old colleagues cautiously reaching out. The message was from Diane, a social worker who had contacted him after seeing his story on the news. She had connected him with various support services, helping him navigate the complex path from homelessness to stability. "Good news," her text read. "Housing application approved. Apartment available next month. Small but clean. Subsidized rent for first 6 months." Ben stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, causing a businessman to swerve around him with an annoyed glance. An apartment of his own? The possibility hadn't seemed real until this moment. He continued walking, his mind racing with the implications. If the teaching position came through, and with his nightly performances at Bellini's, he might actually be able to afford rent after the subsidy ended. He might have a real home again. By the time he reached the restaurant, it was mid-afternoon. The staff was busy preparing for dinner service, but Tony waved him over to the bar where he was checking inventory. "How'd it go?" Tony asked, setting aside his clipboard. "I think it went well," Ben replied. "They said they'll let me know tomorrow." Tony nodded. "Good. Listen, there's something we need to talk about." He gestured toward his office. "Got a minute?" Inside the cluttered office, Tony handed Ben a business card. "This guy called 3 times today. Says he's a talent agent. Wants to talk to you about opportunities." Ben examined the card skeptically. "What kind of opportunities?" "Concert bookings," he said. "Recording deals. The whole package." Tony leaned against his desk. "I told him I'd pass along the message, but it's your call." Ben set the card down. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "Fair enough," Tony said. "But there's something else." He picked up a folder and handed it to Ben. This came in the mail. Inside was a letter from a local arts foundation, along with a check for $5,000. The letter explained that Ben had been awarded an emergency grant for artists experiencing hardship, and that the money could be used for anything that would help rebuild his career. Ben stared at the check in disbelief. I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll use it," Tony suggested. "Get yourself a proper wardrobe for teaching. Maybe start looking at piano." "Pianos?" Ben looked up, startled. "You can't be a piano teacher without a piano," Tony pointed out. "And you can't keep playing only at restaurants forever." The thought of owning a piano again, of having a space where he could practice whenever he wanted, was almost too much to imagine. "One step at a time," Ben said, carefully returning the check to the folder. That evening, Bellini's was packed as usual. Ben's performances had become a local sensation, drawing crowds every night. As he played, he noticed familiar faces in the audience. Dr. Chen had returned with several colleagues from the conservatory, watching with critical attention. Between sets, a woman approached his table. She was elegantly dressed with silver hair and a dignified bearing. "Mr. Wilson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Helen Park, director of the Community Outreach Program at City Memorial Hospital." Ben stood to shake her hand, curious about why she had sought him out. "I've been following your story with great interest," she continued. "Our hospital has a music therapy program for patients undergoing long-term treatment. We've been looking for someone to lead a new initiative, focused on piano instruction for patients, particularly those dealing with physical rehabilitation and emotional trauma. I don't have training in music therapy," Ben said hesitantly. Dr. Park smiled. "But you do have experience with using music to heal. Your own journey demonstrates that." She handed him her card. "The position would be part-time, complementing your teaching rather than replacing it. Please consider it." As she walked away, Ben realized how quickly his world was expanding. From having nothing to suddenly having options, it was overwhelming. After closing, as Ben was helping the staff straighten up the dining room, Lisa approached with her phone. "You should see this," she said, showing him a social media page. It was titled Friends of Ben Wilson and had over 15,000 members. The page was filled with messages of support, offers of help, and stories from people who had been touched by his music and his journey. "People are organizing a benefit concert," Lisa explained. "Look at this post. A piano store is donating an upright for your apartment. And here, a local tailor is offering free alterations for interview clothes." It just keeps going. Ben scrolled through the posts, stunned by the outpouring of goodwill from complete strangers. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why would people do all this for someone they don't even know?" Lisa considered this. Maybe because your story reminds them that talent and worth can be hidden in unexpected places. Or maybe because everyone likes to believe in second chances. The next morning, Ben woke early and went for a walk before the city fully came to life. The past week had been a whirlwind and he needed space to think. He found himself in a small park near the conservatory, sitting on a bench as the sun rose higher in the sky. His phone rang. Dr. Chen calling with news from the committee. Ben answered, his heart pounding. "They've approved your appointment," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "Assistant professor of piano starting next month. The salary is modest, but it comes with benefits, including health insurance." Ben thanked him, his voice thick with emotion. When the call ended, he sat motionless, trying to process everything that had happened. A young woman with a stroller walked past, then stopped and turned back.
"Excuse me," she said hesitantly.
"Are you the pianist from the video? The one who played at Bellini's?" When Ben nodded, her face lit up. "My husband and I watched your performance online. We've been learning piano together, not very well, I'm afraid." She laughed self-consciously. "But hearing you play, it reminded us why we started. Why music matters." After she continued on her way, Ben remained on the bench thinking about what she had said. Why music matters. In his darkest moments on the streets, when hunger and hopelessness had been his constant companions, music had been the one thing he couldn't let go of. Even without a piano, the melodies had lived in his mind, keeping some essential part of him intact. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Meeting at 10 a.m. to sign housing paperwork. Don't be late." As Ben stood to leave, he noticed a street musician setting up nearby, an older man with a battered guitar case open for donations. Without hesitation, Ben walked over and dropped the $20 Tony had given him for lunch into the case. The man looked up in surprise. "Thanks, brother." "No," Ben said quietly. "Thank you for the music." As he walked toward his meeting, Ben thought about the road ahead. There would be challenges. Rebuilding a career, maintaining sobriety, learning to live in society again after years on the margins. But for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't walking that road alone. His phone buzzed again. A text from Tony. "Reporter from National Public Radio wants to do a feature story." "Interested?" Ben smiled to himself. 1 week ago, he had been hungry and desperate, gathering his courage to ask if he could play for food. Now the world wanted to hear not just his music, but his story. "Yes," he texted back. "I'm interested." It was time to start giving back to the community that had so unexpectedly embraced him. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening when a hungry man had asked to play the piano for food. The spring afternoon was warm as people began filing into the city's Performing Arts Center, tickets in hand. The marquee outside displayed in bold letters, "Benjamin Wilson returned to the stage." Inside a small dressing room, Ben adjusted his tie in the mirror. The reflection still sometimes startled him. The healthy face looking back at him with trimmed hair and clear eyes seemed to belong to someone else. The new charcoal suit fit perfectly, another gift from the community that had embraced him so completely. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Tony entered, looking slightly uncomfortable in his own suit. In the 6 months of their friendship, Ben had never seen the restaurant owner dressed so formally. "Packed house," Tony reported. "They've added extra chairs in the back." Ben nodded, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. "I didn't expect so many people." "Are you kidding? This is the comeback story of the year. Everyone wants to be able to say they were here." Ben turned from the mirror. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. Tony approached and straightened Ben's already straight tie, a nervous gesture more for his own benefit than Ben's. Look, you've been playing for crowds at the restaurant for months. You teach at the conservatory now. You even performed at that hospital fundraiser last month. This is different, Ben said quietly. This is official, my name on the program. Critics in the audience. If I fail tonight, you won't, Tony interrupted firmly. But even if every critic hated your performance, which they won't, you've already succeeded. Look at where you are compared to where you were. Another knock came and Dr. Chen peeked in. 10 minutes, Benjamin. After he left, Ben took a deep breath and reached for his suit jacket. I should thank you, he said to Tony, for taking a chance on me that night. For everything since, Tony waved away the gratitude. Save the speeches for after the performance. Right now, just focus on the music. As Tony left to find his seat, Ben remained alone in the dressing room. He closed his eyes and performed the mental preparation ritual he had developed over the past months, visualizing the pieces he would play, feeling the emotion behind each one, centering himself in the music rather than in his nerves. On the small table beside him sat a framed photograph, the only personal item he had brought backstage. It showed Lily, his late wife, smiling at the camera with her violin tucked under her chin. He touched the frame gently. Wish me luck, he whispered. The walk to the stage felt both endless and too quick. Waiting in the wings, Ben could hear the murmur of the audience, sense their anticipation. Dr. Chen stepped onto the stage first to introduce him, speaking briefly about music's power to transform lives. Then came the words Ben had once thought he would never hear again. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Benjamin Wilson. The applause that greeted him as he walked out was thunderous. Ben bowed slightly, then settled onto the bench of the magnificent grand piano that dominated center stage. He adjusted the seat, took a breath, and began to play. The program opened with Bach, precise, structured, mathematical. Ben had chosen it deliberately to demonstrate technical control and focus. As his fingers moved across the keys, the months of dedicated practice showed in every clean run and perfectly voiced chord. From Bach, he transitioned to Chopin, emotional, romantic, expressive. This was music that spoke of love and loss, joy and sorrow. Ben poured his own experiences into each phrase, telling his story without words. The audience sat rapt, many leaning forward in their seats as if trying to get closer to the source of such beauty. In the third row, Tony watched with a proud smile. Beside him sat Lisa and Miguel from the restaurant, both dressed in their Sunday best. Scattered throughout the audience were others who had played roles in Ben's journey. Diane, the social worker, Dr. Park from the hospital, former colleagues who had reconnected with him, students from his classes at the conservatory. For the final piece before intermission, Ben had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece that had once been his signature work. Without an orchestra behind him, he played an arrangement for solo piano, but the power of the music was undiminished. As the last chords faded, there was a moment of complete silence before the audience erupted in a standing ovation. Backstage during intermission, Ben sipped water and tried to stay focused. People kept popping in to congratulate him. The concert hall director, fellow musicians, even the mayor, who had come specifically to hear the man whose story had brought positive attention to the city's arts programs. How are you holding up? Dr. Chen asked, bringing him a fresh bottle of water. Good, Ben replied and realized he meant it. The initial nerves had faded once his fingers touched the keys. The piano had always been his true home, the place where he felt most himself. The second half of the program consisted of more contemporary works, including a piece Ben had composed during his months of recovery. Titled simply Redemption, it traced a musical journey from darkness into light, incorporating elements of classical structure with more modern harmonies. As he played the final hopeful chords, he saw tears on many faces in the audience. For his encore, Ben had prepared something special. He spoke to the audience for the first time that evening, his voice steady and warm. Before I play my final piece tonight, I want to take a moment to thank some people who made this evening possible. He gestured toward Tony in the audience. This gentleman gave me a chance when no one else would. He offered food to a hungry stranger and in doing so, helped me find my way back to music and to myself. The spotlight found Tony, who looked embarrassed but nodded in acknowledgement as the audience applauded. There are too many others to name individually, Ben continued. The doctors who helped me address my depression, the social workers who connected me with housing and health care, the foundation that provided a grant for me to rebuild my career, the conservatory that took a chance on me as a teacher, the countless people who offered support through social media donations and simply showing up to hear me play at a little Italian restaurant. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. They say it takes a village to raise a child. I've learned it also takes a community to rebuild a life. My journey is not unique. There are people struggling on our streets every day who have gifts, talents, and worth that we often fail to see. If my story has any meaning, I hope it reminds us to look more closely at those we might otherwise pass by. Ben returned his hands to the keys. This final piece is dedicated to my late wife, Lily, who always believed in me, and to everyone who helped me believe in myself again. The melody that followed was simple yet profound, a lullaby-like theme that spoke of comfort and peace. Many recognized it as the piece he often played at the hospital now, where he volunteered weekly with patients in the long-term care ward. When the final note faded, the applause was immediate and sustained. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears. Flowers were brought to the stage. The reviews would later call it a triumphant return, and a testament to the redemptive power of music. But in that moment, what mattered most to Ben were the genuine smiles on familiar faces. Afterward, a small reception was held in the concert hall lobby. Ben found himself surrounded by well-wishers, including many of his students and several prominent musicians who had come to witness his return to the stage. A local news crew approached, asking for a brief interview. The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, positioned herself beside Ben. "Mr. Wilson, 6 months ago you were homeless, asking to play piano for food. Tonight you performed to a sold-out concert hall. What does that journey feel like?" Ben considered the question carefully. "Humbling," he finally said, "and hopeful. When I was at my lowest, music was the one thing I couldn't let go of. It remained a part of me even when I had nothing else. I'm grateful that it led me back to a community that gave me a second chance. And what's next for you?" The reporter asked. "Teaching remains my priority," Ben replied. "Passing on what I've learned, both about music and about resilience. I've started a scholarship fund for talented students facing financial hardship, and I'm working with local outreach programs to bring music education to homeless shelters." As the interview concluded, Ben noticed a man standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. He was roughly dressed, his clothes worn but clean, with the unmistakable look of someone who had known hard times. When their eyes met, the man nodded slightly in recognition, one traveler acknowledging another who had walked a similar path. Ben excused himself from the reception and approached the man. "Did you enjoy the concert?" he asked. "Very much," the man replied. "I used to play a little myself. Nothing like you, but—" He trailed off with a small shrug. "There's a piano in the practice room down the hall," Ben said. "Would you like to play for a bit?" The man's eyes widened slightly. "They wouldn't mind?" "I'm sure they wouldn't," Ben assured him. "I'd like to hear you play if you're willing." As they walked together toward the practice room, Ben felt a sense of things coming full circle. The journey from that first night at Bellini's to this moment had been extraordinary, but he knew that true redemption wasn't found in standing ovations or glowing reviews. It was found in moments like this. One person reaching out to another, creating connection through music. Inside the practice room, the man sat tentatively at the upright piano, his weathered hands hovering over the keys for a moment before beginning to play. The melody was simple but played with genuine feeling. Ben listened, recognizing in this stranger the same essential love of music that had kept him going through his darkest times. When the man finished, he looked up with a question in his eyes. "That was beautiful," Ben said sincerely. "Would you like to learn more? I teach classes at the community center on Tuesday evenings. They're free, open to anyone who wants to attend." "I might like that," the man said, a small smile lifting the corners of his mouth. Later that night, after the crowds had dispersed and the concert hall had grown quiet, Ben sat alone at the grand piano on the now empty stage. He played softly just for himself, a melody that had been forming in his mind throughout the evening, the beginning of a new composition. In the notes, he could hear echoes of where he had been and hints of where he might go. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But as his fingers moved across the keys in the quiet hall, Ben Wilson knew with certainty that he had found his way home.